this is Summer Lynn from Chicago, Illinois. Just wanted to give a huge shout out to the Relay for all the love and support they've given my team and I. And make sure you stay tuned for all the latest boxing news.
Welcome to the motherfucking Relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. First on the docket is the heavyweight match between Croatian sensation Allin Bobbik and Shondell Winters. Shondell, who at least to me seemed to have seen too many Winters to offset the come-forwardness, the aggression, and the freshness of Allin Bobbik. I was confident that Allin's going to go in there and he's going to get the knockout. Time has proven me right. That's exactly what he did. I want to say, however, that this isn't the kind of knockout that you go shouting from the rooftops about, you understand. Allin Bobbik has advanced to a record of 4-0, but given his physical dimensions, his build, relative to that of the median build of the average heavyweight running around here today, put simply, I think Allin Bobbik is a bit too small for this division. He's a bit too small for this weight class. Understand that former cruiserweight champions, Alexander Usyk, Murat Gassiev, these guys, they're on the small end of the spectrum as far as heavyweights go, and these guys are bigger guys with more generous dimensions than Allin Bobbik. And maybe that disparity in size hasn't caught up to Allin just yet, but, well, look at who you're fighting. You're fighting Shondell Winters, another guy who's like you, another moderately sized heavyweight who's on the smaller end of the spectrum. As time progresses, and as Allin's career progresses, as he attempts to approach that upper echelon of fighters, that upper echelon of heavyweights, he might find that he's just not adequately suited for the job.
Size matters.
Don't let anybody tell you different. It has its role to play. It can make things easier, it can make things harder, depending on what end of the spectrum you're on. Allin Bobbik, he's no finesse fighter. This guy's an aggressor. This guy's a mauler. This guy's a puncher. And how do you think that aggressive come-forward style would go over with some of the more generously proportioned heavyweights in this division? You ask me, and I think that Allin Bobbik should cut a couple of pounds and go down there campaign as a cruiserweight.
I don't think he's going to get that far as a heavyweight.
Allin's base style, that come-forwardness, that aggression makes for a lot of big train, little train situations. And what Allin will find is that more often than not, he's the little train. Oh, I know that the cruiserweight division isn't one of the glamour weights. It certainly doesn't get the same attention and reception that the heavyweight division does, but consider Alexander Usyk for a moment. You know, that guy managed to get himself a lot of attention with his performances, with his dominance. I happen to think Allin Bobbik has a fan-friendly enough style that if he went down there and he was smacking around guys the way he just smacked around Shondell Winters, people are going to like him. People are going to want to see him. People are going to pay to see him.
He should go down there.
It's just one man's opinion. Feel free to disagree. So congratulations to Allin Bobbik for advancing to a professional record of 4-0. But I reiterate, as this guy approaches that upper echelon of heavyweights, what he'll find is that he's out of place. We then come to one of the big two fights on that same card, the rematch between Katie Taylor and Delphine Persoon. And I'll say that in spots, Katie Taylor seemed to have been fighting the fight that I expected her to fight. That rather than relying on hand speed, combinations, and overall firepower, instead of trying to match Delphine Persoon blow for blow, Katie Taylor would win this fight on the balls of her feet. That movement and angles,
Precision punching.
would be her keys to a more decisive, clear-cut victory. I'll say that for at least the first two rounds, that's the kind of fight we saw Katie Taylor fight. But Delphine Persoon did manage to make things messy from round 3 moving forward. And there was a very similar element in this fight that we saw in the first fight, to where a lot of people are thinking that just because Delphine Persoon is taking the punches well, and just because Delphine Persoon is still coming forward, she's not discouraged, and she's swinging for the fences, that somehow she's winning the round.
Getting hit in the face don't score points.
Pushing Katie Taylor around, wrestling in the clinch, all that stuff, you know. It makes things difficult in its own way, but it's not actually winning you the round, you understand. In order to win the round, you're going to need clean punching, effective aggression, and it's hardly effective aggression when you're swinging for the fences and missing.
Delphine threw a lot of punches.
And that is her calling card. That's what she does. That's what she's known for. But make no mistake, a good number of those punches didn't hit nothing but air. You know, a lot of people need to understand how it is a round in a professional boxing match is scored. It's scored on the premise of defense, clean punching, effective aggression, and ring generalship. Now, perhaps you could give Delphine ring generalship on the strength of
how it looked.
The fight looking the way that it looked, that if these girls are moving around the ring, and if the aesthetic of this fight is what it is, it's as a result of what Delphine is doing. Perhaps you could give her ring generalship, but you certainly couldn't give her defense.
No way.
Couldn't give her effective aggression, at least not in every round, because a good number of those rounds, Delphine was swinging and missing. You know, volume for the sake of volume means nothing if you're not landing.
It's where clean punching comes in.
That's what makes it effective aggression. The aggression has to be effective. You have to land scoring blows. I want to say that Delphine did make things difficult for Katie in all the same ways that she made things difficult for Katie in the first fight. Delphine is such an aggressive, relentless volume puncher, such a come-forward pressure fighter, that it's hard to look good against her. It's hard to fight a finesse fight against somebody that's going to take your best shot and keep on coming. But I will say that Katie's victory in this fight was a bit more decisive, a bit more clear-cut than her victory in the previous fight, a victory that some people don't even consider a victory. That's understandable. But in this rematch,
It actually was a bit more decisive.
the work was a bit more clean, a bit more tidied up. It's not like the way it was in the first fight to where, you know, Katie Taylor's laying on the ropes, baiting Delphine to come in and get into an exchange, labored flurries.
Real scrappy.
In this fight, unlike the previous fight, we saw a little bit more movement from Katie Taylor, a bit more angles, a bit more counter-punching.
It was a little cleaner.
Now, 2 of the 3 judges had it 96 to 94. One of the judges had it 98 to 93, all in favor of Katie Taylor. That 98 to 93 card, I don't agree with that. That's a tad bit wide for my tastes. Myself, on my own card, I had it 5 rounds to 5 with 1 swing round that could have went either way. And I swung it to Delphine, but I swung it to Delphine knowing that the judges might swing it to Katie. Essentially what I had was a draw, 5 rounds to 5 with 1 swing round. But if I would have swung that round to Katie, what we would have been looking at would have been 6 rounds to 4 in favor of Katie Taylor. I keep my card the way that it is. I endorse the draw. Katie Taylor keeps her belt.
Which she did.
So as far as the outcome, I take no issue with the outcome, but I do take issue with that 98-93 card. So I reiterate, that's a bit wide for me. I mean, Katie made it clearer than she did the last time, but not that fucking clear. Now, for those of you out there in favor of controversy, sensationalist claims that perhaps Katie Taylor didn't win this fight, I will remind you that Delphine Persoon, she ain't complaining. A post-fight quote from Delphine reads, "I respect the result this time. I had to eat and eat to make 135. I could not hurt her this time. She's very technical. If you can't hurt her, she runs around and outboxes you." But you see what Delphine said. She respects the result this time, that she couldn't hurt Katie. If you can't hurt Katie, she's going to outbox you. Essentially, Delphine is acquiescing to losing this fight. So before you go telling me about your scorecard, how you had it, how this is a robbery, you're going to have to reconcile why it is that Delphine Persoon isn't saying that.
Why are you?
If Delphine Persoon herself is saying that she respects the decision this time out, that she couldn't hurt Katie, and that if you can't hurt Katie, she's going to outbox you, if this is what's coming out of Delphine Persoon's own mouth, then perhaps the fallacy doesn't rest with the actual judges' scorecards, but yours. And what exactly is it that you're scoring? What, the clinching, the wrestling, the roughhouse tactics? Being able to take a clean punch and keep coming forward, keep swinging for the fences?
What are you scoring? Her engine?
Her gas tank or her punch resistance? Because you know what you're supposed to be scoring? You're supposed to be scoring the round, and you're supposed to be scoring the round on the premise of clean punching, effective aggression, ring generalship, and defense. As far as clean punching, yeah, Delphine got off a couple of good shots. She did, but so did Katie, except when Katie did it, the work was a lot cleaner. That's effective aggression, that's clean punching. Defense would have to go to Katie, as defense has never been Delphine Persoon's calling card. Ring generalship, perhaps you could give that to Delphine, but
What about all the other stuff?
you know, you want to give her credit for making things difficult, making it a messy fight, a scrappy fight, and in spots, making Katie fight her fight. Yeah, she did that in spots. But round by round, Katie Taylor showed the cleaner work, and that's what won her the fight. That's more or less what I was anticipating. So congratulations to Katie Taylor for living up to my expectations and retaining all the belts in the lightweight division. Moving on to what was the main event of that same card, The uppercut heard round the world, seen round the world. The shock upset loss of Dillon Whyte at the hands of Alexander Povetkin. It's the funniest thing because I stressed in the build-up of this fight that Alexander stood more than just a fighting chance here. That even if I decide to go with Dillon to win, which I did, it's not a foregone conclusion that he will. You know, the day before the fight, Canadian Boxiana, GM Strong, posted a comment via Twitter that read, he had a sneaking suspicion that either Katie Taylor or Dillon Whyte were going to falter on Saturday, to which I replied, well, if it's going to be one of them, in all likelihood, it's going to be Dillon. I had more faith, more confidence in Katie Taylor's ability to adapt and box her way to a decision than I did in Dillon Whyte. Well, I picked Dillon to win, I wasn't confident. You see, Alexander Povetkin is not your run-of-the-mill pressure fighter. His brand of pressure doesn't come in the form of sheer volume, a barrage of punches that you can shell up against and brace yourself for. No, Alexander Povetkin is a lot more crafty, a lot more skilled. His brand of pressure comes in the form of footwork, distance and spacing relative to that of his opponent. That's how he keeps a guy under pressure. That coupled with his explosivity. He's spontaneous, he is sudden, and he fires very compact, tight punches, so tight that you don't see them coming. That's what makes him dangerous. Consider how it is that Dillon Whyte got knocked out in a fucking place. He lets go of a right hand, and Alexander slips left, lets go of his left, and catches Dillon between the punches with an uppercut that he couldn't have seen coming. A well-placed shot, a peach of an uppercut that only a skilled craftsman could employ. And for perspective, this is in a fight that Dillon Whyte was well on his way to winning, fighting judiciously behind his left hand and landing it, scoring two knockdowns in the fourth round. I had it a clean sweep at the beginning of the fifth with Dillon Whyte well ahead on the cards. Not that I was expecting this fight to go to the cards. And just like that, bam. Every single cliche you've ever heard about the heavyweight division materializes in one left uppercut, one counter left uppercut fired by Alexander Povetkin. This is the heavyweight division, folks. The one-punch division where a single shot can end the night, end the fight, even if you're well on your way to winning it. And in that way, it's not necessarily that Dillon Whyte did something wrong, so much as Alexander Povetkin did something right. Alexander Povetkin has graced the heavyweight division's top 10 ranked standings for, I don't know, the last 5-6 years, maybe more. There's a reason he's been able to maintain that rank.
He is a quality operator.
And there are very few fighters that you can match against Alexander Povetkin and arrive to the conclusion that it is a foregone conclusion that they will win. Dillon Whyte was not one of these heavyweights. I picked him to win, but I wasn't confident. I feel for the plight of Dillon Whyte, who was kept waiting for a very long time for a title shot that he may never get, because now he must rebuild. We heard immediately after the fight, Dillon Whyte asked Eddie Hearn about setting up the rematch because it just so happens that Dillon Whyte has a rematch clause that he means to activate before the year is out. But given how he lost, one is left to wonder, what exactly can Dillon Whyte do differently in a second fight if a second fight takes place before the year is out? It looked like he was doing everything right. What stopped him was no lucky shot, no phantom punch. That was a peach of an uppercut that only a skilled craftsman could have landed. Given how things worked out, one is left to wonder, what exactly can Dillon Whyte do differently in a rematch? I just don't know. There's a lot here to reconcile and a lot to mull over. More than we can reconcile and mull over in a single video. But my reaction to this shock upset is that this is why we watch. This is what keeps us on the edge of our seat. This is why we love the sport of boxing, folks. It wouldn't really be everything that it is if it didn't have that air of spontaneity. We then come to the light heavyweight contest, the title eliminator between Joe Smith Jr. and the later Alvarez. And this is a much more simple situation to reconcile. Put simply, Elater Alvarez might be a more skilled craftsman, a more skilled boxer than Joe Smith Jr. But based on how he looked in this fight, what he isn't is a better physical specimen, as Joe Smith Jr. physically overwhelmed Eleider Alvarez. Eleider, who looked to be trying to land a counter shot but never got the opportunity because of the barrage of punches coming from Joe Smith Jr. Joe Smith Jr. is a pressure fighter like Alexander Povetkin is a pressure fighter, but Joe Smith Jr. is nowhere near as subtle. He's going to come after you, and victory hinges on whether or not you're able to either work around him or get his respect. Eleider Alvarez was unable to do either. And with this, I went 2 for 2. My predictions this weekend, I got 2 right and I got 2 wrong. This was one of the ones I got wrong. I had a little bit more faith in Eleider Alvarez than I should have, because at 36 years old, it was crystal clear from the opening bell that physically he just wasn't up for it with Joe. The mobility wasn't there to work around him. The durability to weather the shots wasn't there either. The reflexes to effectively work off the counter, which looked like what Eleider Alvarez was trying to do.
They were dull.
They were flat. Eleider Alvarez might be a more polished boxer than Joe, but what he isn't is a better physical specimen, as Joe Smith Jr. is a heavy-handed puncher with a great chin, a lot of heart, and a lot of determination.
He is.
For what it's worth, I will say that Joe Smith Jr. has looked even more put together in his last 2 fights than he has in previous years. This guy's really coming along. He does seem more coordinated now than before. His combinations, his pressure, he just knows how to put it on a guy. Beats the fucking brakes off of Jesse Hart. Goes in there with Eleider Alvarez, a far more experienced guy in the light heavyweight division than Jesse Hart. And what's he do to that guy? He stops him in the 9th after beating him from pillar to post over the course of 9. You could argue that before Joe got the knockout, the fight itself was a clean sweep in his favor on the cards. Not that Joe Smith Jr. is the kind of fighter that's focused on going to the cards. This guy is a very heavy-handed puncher, and it doesn't help one bit that he takes a great punch. Just like that, Eleider Alvarez is pushed out of the world title picture at 175 pounds, as this was a world title eliminator. I expected better of Eleider and perhaps didn't think enough of Joe Smith Jr. Moving forward, I'm going to have to, as I thought, maybe Jesse can box around this guy, and I was wrong. Thought the same thing about Eleider. I was wrong again. I've got to give it to Joe. You really can't count this guy out. He's upset the plans for Fanfara, upset the plans for Bernard Hopkins in what was supposed to be his swan song. He smacked around Jesse Hart, smacked around Eleider Alvarez, took him out.
This guy's not fucking around.
Congratulations to Joe Smith Jr. for a titillating 9th round knockout that I wasn't expecting.